Warren Vanderhill with the Center for Middletown Studies project on Muncie's service providers, and today it's my great pleasure to be speaking with Debbie Bennett, who is the president and CEO of Hillcroft Services. The date is Halloween, October 31st, 2018, and this is Debbie's birthday, so I had to make sure to get that in there. With that said, I want to formally thank you for agreeing to participate in our research project, and I'd like to begin our conversation today by, I guess, asking you to be part of what I call the Wayback Machine. Go back there somewhere and tell me about yourself, and then eventually lead me to the point where you have the position that you currently hold at Hillcroft.
I was born and raised in Daleville, right outside of Muncie, and graduated, went through K through 12 there, graduated, went to Ball State. So I lived in Daleville, traversed to Muncie every day for a job and education. And then after I got my degree, I was actually working at the movie theater at the mall, if you remember that.
I do remember that.
I actually managed that when I was going to college. And then when I graduated from college, didn't actually pursue my, my education. And so it was probably 3 years after I graduated when I finally started looking for, employment, because I enjoyed working out there, working with the public and everything else, and my degree was in accounting. So then I got on with the Girl Scouts, Wapahani Girl Scout Council, and was there as their basically business manager for 3 years. And then the position came open at Hillcroft, and a couple of my friends were telling me, you need to try that, So then I threw my name in the hat and interviewed for the job, and 25 years later, this past June, I've been there that long.
Oh. How many different positions did you have at Hillcroft?
I started out as their director of finance. Now my job, my title changed many times, but it was basically the same job with just additional responsibilities being added to it. As information technology came on the verge, I was the one there that knew enough to be dangerous, so I ended up with all the IT stuff when we started expanding computers, because when I started there, we had one word processor and typewriters.
Did you know much about Hillcroft before you went there?
No, I didn't. And even 25 years later, I meet many, many people in this community that feel like Hillcroft is once they learn of us and our programming, feel like we're one of the best kept secrets in Muncie.
Yeah.
And some of that is because of where our referrals come from. I mean, the way the state system is designed, our referrals come through the Bureau of Developmental Disability Services. Somebody that has a developmental delay or disability has to go through that office, have assessments done, and be determined eligible for services, because the state pays for those services through a Medicaid waiver.
Okay. Is that in Indianapolis?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Well, there's a local office here. There's local BEADS offices throughout the state of Indiana, but it eventually funnels through, the government center downtown. And so that's how they secure their funding. And then they can, at that point in time, when their needs that they have are identified, they're given a budget of dollars that they can spend and a list of providers that provide that service, and then they choose the provider of their choice.
So the background that you had in the College of Business was helpful from the standpoint of seeing I guess I'd call the financial realities of what something like Hillcroft is.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, because there's financial realities with Hillcroft and with the people that we serve.
Yeah.
I mean, there are financial issues on both sides of that. I mean, because our ability to expand and provide additional services is based on how well we manage our money.
Yeah.
And, Hillcroft has done a great job over the years, the 65 years in existence of being self-sufficient, just utilizing the reimbursement rates that we get from the state of Indiana, so that we didn't want to become a burden on the community. There's so many nonprofits out there that need that additional support from the community, have to have lots of fundraisers and things like that, but Hillcroft has been fairly proud of the fact that we haven't had to do that until just recently. And then, we found out through it's been a struggle, because we're in the middle of a capital campaign, because after 65 years and 40 years at the current building that we're at right now, we've run out of space. And over the years, when we have new programs, if there's an unmet need in the community, okay, well, this building's near us, we'll purchase it, pay the mortgage, get it paid off. So we own 6 to 8 facilities here in Muncie. And now that we're getting larger and starting to continue to grow, logistically, it's
Yeah.
become a nightmare because services in one building, you're transporting the clients back and forth, and it cuts into their service provision. It makes it difficult for the providers. So,
Yeah.
but the fact that we hadn't done any fundraising in the past,
Yeah.
our donor base was very shallow, and so going into a $9.1 million project was a pretty lofty goal, but the board and leadership decided we were going to step out on faith, and we were able to arrange an agreement with the city
Yeah.
of Muncie to pull
But
off.
and you're almost there.
Yes, we are. The construction
Yeah.
of the second
Yeah.
phase is already underway and expected to be completed in the spring of next year. So
And when you have that, then all these other bits and pieces would all go
consolidated into
into
one
one
building,
place.
and then we'll actually sell off or liquidate the other facilities.
Oh, okay. Is there enough room for growth out there?
Yes.
Yeah.
The building is actually built to give us the ability for growth,
Yeah.
but then we have the ABA building, which is on the corner of
Right.
Air Park and Walnut.
Yeah.
And then before we'd gotten into this big building project, had purchased the 5 acres that butts up to
Yeah.
that woods
Yeah.
behind our
Yeah,
ABA
right,
clinic
right, right.
from the IUBMH Foundation,
Oh, okay.
because we were thinking about constructing from ground up.
Yeah.
And then we ended up talking with the city and ended up securing that facility. So we own everything from the
yeah.
corner 15 acres back.
So
So there's 7.5
Yeah.
acres between everything that will be used for future growth if
I was going to say the
necessary.
future's there.
Yes.
Well, going along with the historical dimension of what we're doing, which is looking at the ways in which deindustrialization and job losses and economic decline have hit the community, how have the services that your organization provides changed over the past couple of decades?
It was predominantly the services were about education, training services, and now they're flipping to more of therapy services.
Oh, okay.
Because the way the funding works is First Steps is pretty much what's provided,
Right.
or the funding of choice for children until they get into the public school age. And then the public school systems, the Department of
Right.
Education gets the funding to provide services for them. So they don't actually come
Okay.
to services that Hillcroft provides until after high school.
Okay.
And but there has been a large shift, and some of that's societal pressure.
Okay.
There's a lot of validity and a reason to have a sheltered workshop setting for people with disabilities, but there's pressure on the federal level and at the state level at times to we are funded. We have a 14C waiver with the Department of Labor in order to pay piece rate. So that it's calculated based on a prevailing wage. We do prevailing wage studies every year with like services and businesses in the community. We calculate their entry-level earnings, and it's all a formula that's based, and we use that, and right now it's close to $9 an hour. And
Oh,
then
okay.
we do a time study on every job that we do, and it breaks down into a formula that tells them, if you're working on this job, every piece that you produce, you get paid this. So they're paid by the number of pieces that they produce. But a lot of people think that it's sub-minimum wage because
Yeah.
sometimes it takes them longer in an hour's time. Their productivity levels aren't as high as a person without a disability. And so there's been pressure to get rid of that funding and to force inclusion into the community. But there are many families and many people that don't want that because it's just another form of isolation.
Yeah.
I mean, when they're forced out into the community and they're not accepted, they're not embraced, they
Right.
don't become part of the culture of those employers, they feel alone out there, more
Yeah.
alone than if they're working alongside their
Yeah.
peers in one of our operations.
That's very interesting, because I was thinking of another angle on this. That when you have a Muncie of a few decades ago, when there, as Hurley Goodall liked to tell me, there was a good job on every corner.
Yes.
Now those jobs aren't there at all. When you think of the clients that you have and you're trying to place them, now that variety of places where you could place them in different kinds of factories, that's gone.
Correct.
So does it make it more difficult?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And, the base wage and the hourly wage is very competitive to people that actually provide those support services with us as they are a McDonald's
Yeah.
or a Wendy's.
Yeah,
And
right.
so we're fighting for staff.
Yeah.
When you look at somebody that's going to compare a job in retail or a restaurant, hospitality,
Right.
you're looking at that compared to potentially working with people that you have a huge impact on their life, that you
Yeah.
may have to help toilet them, that you may have to help bathe them, you may
Yeah.
have to, help them with their finances, cook for them, get kicked, spit at,
Yeah.
whatever the situation is.
Yeah.
And you have those two options in front of you,
Yeah.
it makes it difficult.
So the number of jobs that are no longer here would have a dramatic effect on what kind of placement
Correct.
you would have. So your opportunities for placement have been cut down
Yes.
significantly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay.
because there's a lot more people that are choosing those jobs now because they
right.
offer a competitive wage compared to the other options that they have in the community. They
So
don't have the factory,
yeah.
high-paying, high-benefit jobs any longer.
Yeah, you take away the Warner Gear and Muncie Chevrolet type jobs and you go down a level, and
Yes.
people who might have had those jobs are now down a level taking
Correct.
the jobs that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's true.
And then, the clients that we serve that do want to work in the community, they're offered minimal hours and
Yeah.
without benefits and things like that. So it makes it difficult for them
Yeah.
to, if they're only working 10 hours a week, what do they do with the rest of their
Right.
week while their parents or caregivers are trying to work and earn a
Yeah.
living?
Yeah.
They have to have somewhere to go, so they end up coming back. But, a different approach that we're trying to do is become an integrated work setting.
Okay.
Just for Hillcroft's sake, is because of the pressures, the external pressures I previously mentioned, that part of our vision for this new facility is that we recently got ISO certified in order to make us more attractive to other larger manufacturing firms that may not be in this area.
Okay.
And we've contracted a large contract with a glass company out of Ohio that's shipping us things because we used to do a lot of jobs for Jarden until they moved all
Oh.
of their operations to Fisher's.
Yeah.
And so they have agencies like Hillcroft or doing it in-house down there now.
Yeah.
They no longer utilize us, but because we had that skill set and history with them,
Yeah.
this other company came along with us. And so some of the larger manufacturers like Mercix and
Yeah,
things like that,
right.
we have some contracts with them and have begun talking to them about, if we can beef up what we need to do, we can become that integrated work setting where people with disabilities can work alongside people without disabilities. So that, since we
Okay.
can't seem to place them in the community,
Right.
we'll bring the community to them.
Okay.
But we also, what we're hearing from some of those employers is there any way that you can do enclaves? They want us to bring them to them. And right now, we don't have the funding to make that happen or the
Okay.
staff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So part of what you do then is serve as an employment bureau?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
How do you do that? I mean, you go out and look for opportunities in the job force where you can place people who are your clients?
And that's our employment services program, and that
Okay.
is funded through vocational rehabilitation. So if somebody's displaced because of a disability, I mean,
Yeah.
they could have been a roofer before, but
Yeah,
they can no
yeah.
longer do that because they've fallen and injured their back. They have to have a different skill set. Vocational rehabilitation will pay for some continuing
Yeah.
education, or they'll actually assign them to us, and we actually sit down with them, do an analysis, find out what their strengths and weaknesses are and their desires, what they want to look at, and then our employment consultants go out in the community and try to locate
Yeah.
a job. Then we have to develop that relationship with the employer. Our employment
Yeah.
consultant learns the job, and then they bring our client alongside them, and they actually teach them the job. And they keep working with them and until they've gained the skills that they need to be able to do the job and begin to fade out, and then they become an employee of
Okay.
that company.
I may be way off on this, but do you have any clients who are veterans? I mean, or
No.
does the VA take care of all that?
The VA takes care of a
Okay.
lot of that. We did used to serve some of those through the vocational rehabilitation
yeah.
program as well. But that's the kind of service that we used to do, yes.
Okay, so people who come back and are in the Middle East and they're wounded or something like that,
Yes.
that's more of a VA kind of thing.
And if they don't get the services they want through VA, that we've had veterans come through
Right.
our employment services program as well too.
Okay. How has your organization's, I guess I would call relationship with your clients changed over time? I mean, it may be a different group, but the service
Actually,
you
it's not.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
So-
we have a lot of long-term
Yeah.
clients because they feel like they've found a home there.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. But our population is aging,
Right.
and so the younger
Okay.
individuals that are graduating now, that's why the change and the shift in the services that are provided, they don't necessarily put as much
Okay.
value in employment, in work. It's more about having a meaningful day and being engaged in the community, but it's not about employment. So that's shifted to our therapy
Yeah.
services.
What I'm going to ask you is I know on the back of your quite attractive business card, I was just looking at it. What are you meet somebody on the street, what are the main goals of your organization?
Is to provide supports and services to people with disabilities and their families
Okay.
in order for them to live as independently as possible in the community. And we do that through a myriad of therapies, through our Creativity Unlimited program where they work on arts, crafts, daily living skills. And it's a wide range. It depends on actual needs of those individuals. Everybody's plan is individualized to whatever the gaps are that they need to
Okay.
help them be successful and independent as
Yeah.
possible.
Would those have been the same goals for Hillcroft 20 or 30 years ago?
No, I don't believe so. 20 or 30 years ago, it was all about education and making a place for them,
Okay.
where they could go beyond school. And
Yeah.
it was all about work. It was predominantly about our workshops.
What do you, this is a weird question to ask with the population of individuals that you work with, but let me try it anyway. In your view, what are the root causes of the challenges that the people that come to you face? I mean, a lot of it's birth.
Yes.
But then you also threw in, and I recently had our roof done. I hate to keep going back to that example. I thought to myself, well, I guess if somebody up on the roof, we have a rather steep roof, fell off and all of a sudden, guy's a great roofer, now he's got to look at doing something else. I mean, that's still there. I mean, that
Yes.
doesn't really change. So somebody who was roofing 30 years ago might be in the same boat as somebody who's roofing today.
Yes. The majority of the clients we have they've just faced developmental challenges
Okay.
since birth.
Yeah.
Because the majority of the diagnosis is to be diagnosed with a developmental disability, it has to be something that has happened
Yeah.
to them prior to the age of 21.
Okay. And that 21 thing is important?
Yes,
Or
for the
why?
funding.
Oh, okay.
That's where the diagnosis comes from. Yeah.
Okay. So it changes dramatically if somebody's 47.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Huh. This is a kind of a shift, but it's important, I think, with all organizations like yours. Have you had any problems in finding staff or people with sufficient expertise?
Yes.
Okay, well, I'd like to have you talk about that a little bit.
Yes, we have, and we mentioned that a little bit prior to that. I mean, our
Right.
professional positions are a little easier to fill because they have, a higher wage.
Right.
And the skill sets that are required are different and more intense. But we've actually been recruiting because when we do, job fairs, we
Right.
do social media, we
Yeah.
do the newspaper, we do radio, all those different types of things and get minimal response. But our professional positions, like our therapists
Yeah,
and things, we
right.
partner with Ball State University,
Right.
so we get social work and psychology majors
Yeah.
that come in, and a lot of times that's a feeder system for our professional positions if they plan on staying in this
Yeah.
community because they fall in love with our clients. And it becomes a long-term. We have a lot of longevity with Hillcroft, which is unique now because people don't tend to stay at jobs as long as they used to.
Right. Yeah.
But they become emotionally involved with our people and develop bonds if
Yeah.
they want to stay there. It's rewarding, and it's not
Yeah.
always just about the money. But we're recruiting a lot of our music therapists and recreational therapists. They've come to us from other states, from North Carolina, Virginia, New York. And
Yeah.
those programs are continuing to grow. In the last 5 years, our music therapy program, we started with a part-time therapist, and now we have 8 full-time therapists.
Has that also changed over time? So again, if you go back 30 years, as far as the,
We didn't even offer
Yeah.
those services
yeah,
then.
that's all new.
But yes, it wasn't a need, and now we're finding that those services are extremely valuable because they give them an outlet and a means to express themselves. It's a means to communicate, which is a lot of issues that they have, is not being heard, not having an outlet for their feelings and their emotions and things like that. So it's been very beneficial.
You can brag a little bit about this, but this is what people told me, so I'll get it in here anyway. Hillcroft's programs, people say to me, the diversity of programs you have, the breadth, the depth, is kind of a national model for communities the size of Muncie is the nation's Middletown. I mean, is that valid?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
I mean, I think there was a movement back in the 50s when the Kings, the Satrians, and the Taylors, the three primary families that got together and decided they wanted something more for their children than being isolated or put in an institution, which is what used to happen, that they wanted more inclusion there. They were the ones that spearheaded that in this area. But there are Hillcrofts all over the state of Indiana.
Okay.
I mean, each county, some of the rural counties that have a smaller population will serve multiple counties, but Muncie, Fort Wayne, Indianapolis, South Bend, the other cities, there are a Hillcroft, an agency similar to Hillcroft in a lot of the counties across the state of Indiana and nationally.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about nationally. So
Yes.
you would expect to find something like
Yes.
this. The reason I say that is just in passing. Dave Ballman said to me, well, I really couldn't have come to work at Ball State for the Ball State University Foundation unless there was a place like Hillcroft.
Well, that was 25 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, that's developed over time, and
Right.
there didn't used to be those organizations in every county.
Right.
Yeah. And a lot of states, we're still new to it, and it's just been a progression. And I believe that the movement has made it a lot easier. I mean, I remember when I was a child that, had a neighbor girl that had a disability, but she was bused someplace else, and isolated. And so when you have that first interaction with somebody with a disability or Down syndrome, it's awkward, it's kind of scary because you don't know how to communicate with them. And so it makes you feel less than adequate. And so it's a scary situation for a lot of kids. But now that they've mainstreamed a lot of them and they have them in the public schools, I mean, my children didn't have that fear. There wasn't a stigma that was associated with them and stuff. So I think they're, they are included much more than they used to be years ago.
Yeah. What's your budget and your sources of funding?
Our sources of funding are predominantly Medicaid waiver, but then we also have private insurance because we have an autism clinic where we serve children with autism that aren't necessarily, their behaviors are so intense that it's not practical to put them in the public school system, so they reach out to us and come to us. We teach them communication skills so they learn how to use their words or whatever their mode of communication is, whether it could be a communication book, it could be sign language, but open them up because that's the source of a lot of their behaviors is because their lack of ability to communicate. And then we mainstream them back into the school systems when their skills increase. But what was the question? I got sidetracked there.
Sources of funding, your budget.
And we have the ABA clinic, which is private insurance.
Sure. Okay.
Then we also have income that we get from the subcontract work that we do in our workshops, in our Hillcroft Industries, and vocational rehabilitation.
Right.
And our operating budget currently right now is $18 million because we have a capital campaign going on, but normally it's about $15 million.
Is it atypical for organizations like Hillcroft's to have capital campaigns? I mean, you think of your colleagues who are directors of programs similar to Hillcroft?
I think it's kind of, that is another thing that has become a movement,
Yeah.
is because a lot of them, their facilities are aging and things. So in the last 25 years, I've been aware of a lot of capital campaigns that have happened with sister organizations, and that is for the same reason.
Yeah.
You've outgrown the facilities or they're not practical for the services that you're currently providing.
A minor digression. What is a Medicaid waiver?
Medicaid waiver, traditional Medicaid serves for its medical issues, it's nursing homes, intensive care facilities for the intellectually disabled, but Medicaid waiver is kind of a carve-out program where the state of Indiana will apply to Medicaid on the federal level for a waiver from that traditional Medicaid model that will pay for other services.
Yeah. So to be blunt, when you think of Medicaid and all the challenges Medicaid faces and all the political ramifications of people, talking about Medicaid, I mean, this is really something you're dependent on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's another reason for the vision that we have with our Hillcroft Industries to beef up that division of what we're doing in order to produce more money that, can offer them jobs, not just them, but the community, and that will subsidize the programs that, if that funding should disappear, trying to become continue to be self-sustaining.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. This may sound silly, but when you think of all these federal funds that are really significant and important in what you do, how do you access those funds? I mean, is it an annual kind of thing that you go through?
Actually, the funding is awarded to the individual. So if they picked up and decided to go to another provider, that money would go them.
Goes with them.
The money follows the person.
Okay.
And it's an hourly reimbursement rate, dependent on the services that we provide. And we just have to bill the state of Indiana and provide the backup documentation and the data to support it, and then the state reimburses us.
Yeah. Well, that leads to the, what I call one of my important questions here, and that is then, I was hesitating to saying this, how has your organization been impacted by changes that have occurred in local, state, and federal regulations?
It's been impacted a lot.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But, it's been impacted by the wages of the individuals. I mean, a lot of the people, the staff that we actually employ to provide the services have a lot of the skill sets that a CNA does, but we don't have direct support professional licensure or certification and the education that goes along behind that to support an increased wage, which we're lobbying with the state of Indiana.
Yeah.
And on a federal level through the ARC and trade associations like NARF that we belong to.
Yeah.
To change that.
Yeah.
But that's, not something that's going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
But it's always a challenge. And that's why, Hillcroft is proud of the fact that we've been resilient enough over the years that for many, many years, I think it was back in 2010, that they cut our rates. Our group home rates were cut by 10%. Our supported employment rates were cut by 2%. Our supported living rates were cut, and they stayed that way for the longest time. It made it very difficult for us to give any kind of a meaningful raise to our staff, and but we were still able to have quite a bit of success with our retention levels and things, as I mentioned before, because it's about the relationship, and it's about a lot of our staff feel like there's a purpose in what they do.
Yeah. So to kind of turn this on its head, the federal regulations are what I would say is really critical
Yes, it is.
to your operation.
And again, we have the national representatives from the ARC and from like our trade association that does lobbying and things on our behalf. And it's not a population that's going to go away.
No.
So the country would have to make a decision at one point in time whether they're just going to discard, these supports need to be in place not only for the people we're serving, but for their families in order for them to continue their meaningful lives as well.
But state regulations probably aren't that much of an impact?
State regulations, a lot of those model the federal level.
Oh, okay.
Because they're at the federal level's mercy because they're regulated by them because the funding flows to them from the federal government.
Mm-hmm. And local regulations wouldn't be something that would impact you a great deal?
No.
Okay.
We haven't. And Muncie has been very supportive of Hillcroft Services. Yes.
Do you have any specific connections to faith communities in Muncie? Part of what got us going on this is that as we interviewed leaders of the faith communities year and a half ago, we weren't really surprised to find how much service providing congregations did and individual members in congregations. But there's no question that the volume of what numbers of people in the faith communities did really surprised us. It was huge. And so we decided that's one of the reasons we want to take a look at the service providers, because there seemed to be this really important link to the extent that if you pulled all these service providers who were in churches and were doing this as a member of a congregation out of the community's work in this context, you'd be in pretty tough shape. So that's a fair statement.
It's a fair statement.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't have any, we're not associated with any particular
Okay.
faith or a particular congregation, but
right.
we have individuals on our board,
Right, yeah.
you know,
Okay,
that are church members in the community.
Right.
And it's basically about a network
okay.
within the community itself, from our board and from the professionals that work at Hillcroft.
Yeah,
But we're not specifically tied to any one organization. We get
yeah,
varied, donation supports and
Yeah.
service projects that come, but I mean, it's not from a consistent.
okay. I wasn't thinking of it as tied, but if you ask some other service providers in town, they'll say things like, oh yeah, we have a long tie with the First Baptist Church, or
Right,
the
and-
First
and-
Presbyterian, or something
And
like that.
Hillcroft doesn't have, no.
And never has had.
Mm-mm,
Okay.
no.
It's just more,
And that could be something that Hillcroft needs to explore.
yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
But
well,
it's
lots of
something
other,
that's
lots of
never
other,
It's
yeah,
something that's never happened in the past.
yeah. Well, there's no question that a lot of other service providers have done that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of, if there weren't those ties between some service providers in the community and particular congregations in Muncie, it would be a lot tougher, I
Yes.
guess I'd say, for their,
Oh, I could definitely
for
see
them
that.
to do that work. But, turn this another way, I'm just now at the beginning of this project, as you well know, probably there are very few service providers in the community that are as dependent on federal legislation as Hillcroft is.
That's correct.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't have, as you point out, Medicaid and the other
Mhm.
things that you're speaking of.
I think YOC might experience that a little bit because they deal with Department of Education with some of the kids that they serve and the school systems, but not
Yeah.
necessarily.
Yeah, I'll ask.
On a grander
I'll ask
scale.
Rick Rory about
Yeah.
that, but I don't think there'd be that much federal. I think
Yes.
it might be more
Local.
state.
Yeah, state and local.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, state and local. Well, those are the formal questions I have, but at the end of my interviews, I always want to give the person I'm speaking with an opportunity to add anything that you might like to tell our audience some of the things that are important that we might not have covered when it comes to the mission and the future aims and aspirations of Hillcroft.
Well, I think you've done a very thorough job with your questions, or else I rambled because I
No,
shared
no,
a lot
no,
with it.
not
I mean,
at
I
all.
didn't talk.
No.
I didn't speak too much to our residential program.
Yeah, we'll talk a
which
little
is
about
the
that.
largest portion of Hillcroft
Okay.
Services. I mean,
Yeah.
when people ask, do you know anything about Hillcroft?
Right.
What they associate with are the programs that take place in our facilities
Right.
because they're more
That's true.
visible.
That's true.
But more than half of our workforce is out in the community because
Okay.
a lot of our, not a lot, all of our clients have landlords. They have
Mhm.
roommates, and based again, an individual plan is developed based on the needs that they have or supports that are necessary for them to sign that lease and to live out in the community. So, our staff don't really have a home base. Their home
Right.
base is that they go into. It's
Yeah.
like a home health care kind of
Right.
thing. Only it's not just a medical model.
Yeah.
We cook, we help them
Yeah.
clean, we help them pay their bills, we help, whatever, need or support they have.
And your number of clients, because we didn't get that in either. Right now, you have how many clients?
We serve almost 750
Yeah,
people a
yeah.
year.
Compare that with 3 decades ago in terms of numbers.
Oh my. When I started working at Hillcroft, we had 57 staff.
Mhm.
We have about 305 now.
Yeah.
And we had almost a $2 million budget. And I
Right.
shared with you, it's now in
Yeah.
excess of 15 million.
Yeah.
So there's been a lot of growth.
Mhm.
And we feel like that's going to be something
Mhm.
that continues.
Let me go back to your point about the residential program, because I think that is very important. How is that organized? How do you set up the residential program?
Well, first of all, you have to get approved by the state of Indiana. There's an
Okay.
application process that
Right.
you have to go through because Hillcroft is contracting to be a provider
Okay.
that the state pays to
Mhm.
provide that service. So you have to be, go through an accreditation process.
Oh,
You have
okay.
to have insurance. I mean, there's
Yeah.
a whole myriad of things that you
Yeah.
have to go through for the application to become established as a provider.
Yeah.
And then it's about hiring the staff and putting your systems in place to support those people living out in the community.
Yeah. You mentioned you have over 300 people
Mm-hmm.
working for Hillcroft.
Yes.
Okay. And
And we have, that's just our staff, our
Yeah.
support staff. We have over 300 people with disabilities working in our workshops.
okay.
So every 2 weeks, we process a payroll for over 600 paychecks.
And 20 or 30 years ago, that would have been about 20% of that?
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
yes,
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing when I found out how many people work at YOC. I was really
Mhm.
taken back by that.
yes.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to add?
I don't believe so.
Okay, well, I want to be, on your birthday, I wanna thank you very much indeed for participating in our project.
Well, thank you
You've
for
added
inviting
a lot,
me to
and I
share.
think Hillcraft sure adds a lot to the community as well.
Thank you.
Welcome.